year, would we go back and do that with the tools we now have? How many would raise your hands and say yes? I know that I would.
I would.
So if we apply that to today, unfortunately, the vaccines are really our only ticket out of this situation. That's where we find ourselves. The rates of the virus is going up so dramatically all over the world. We hear about these new variants that are mutated versions, which may potentially spread faster. And really the only defense that we have is to get as many people vaccinated as possible. And that is truly our only light at the end of the tunnel. And that's our only way to get back to some state of normal as a society. I want to address two things that I'm seeing in the chat. Okay. So one is this issue, ma'am, you said you still have antibodies, which is kind of your badge of courage for having gone through this illness. So what if you were already sick sometime in 2020 and you still have antibodies? Do you still need the vaccine? It seems like you have protection, so why do we need the vaccine still? Well, the answer is the public health officials and scientists would say, yes, you still do need the vaccine. And this is because we cannot guarantee from the infection what level of antibodies you have. We can't really count those, and we don't know how long those are going to last and how protective they're going to be for how many months, okay? But the vaccine, especially when you get the 2 doses, like how it's recommended, these are like a super duper boost to your immune system to make antibodies at a very high level that are going to last you a long time, probably longer than if you had the infection. And now those antibodies that you developed starting last spring are starting to wear off in your system. And as the months keep going on, you're going to find yourself potentially vulnerable if we don't get the vaccine, okay? So having had past infection, even if it was only a month ago, we would still recommend that as soon as it's available that you go get your shot, okay? Let's also talk for a few minutes about these variants that you've been hearing in the news. I don't want to scare anyone, so let's really make sure that we have a good understanding of what this means for us. These variants are the same old virus, okay? The same old thing that we've been hearing about for a year now, with a couple of mutations that may change the way that it works. It may make them spread faster between individuals in a household. It may make them not be recognized as easily by our immune systems. However, here's the very good news, okay, from scientists. The antibodies that we make when we get the vaccine, they're not only against a very small area of the virus, they're against that whole thing, that whole long spike protein. So even if there's a couple of changes here and there, these vaccines, the antibodies that you'll produce in response to them, will still protect against a whole broad range of these COVID viruses, okay? Now scientists from Pfizer, from Moderna, they're doing experiments. They're taking these new virus variants and they're testing their antibodies. And the early data tells us that things still work, okay? So even more reason for us to try to get vaccinated, encourage our family members to do so, and get on those lists to get vaccinated, okay? Speaking a little bit for the really erratic, very frustrating process that patients and people in the community find themselves in when trying to get on these lists for vaccination. What I would say is hold on to, let's be hopeful, let's be optimistic, because in just, a week exactly that we've had this new administration, there have been major changes in legislation and major use of these like major powers that the federal government has to make these vaccine companies really like ramp up their distribution and their production. And so if we just hold on tight, we continue to do what we're doing with the mask wearing and the not traveling and the not being around too many people, if we just hold the fort down, within a couple of months time frame, the vaccine outlook will look totally different. We will have more doses. We will have more investment from the federal government to help states and cities distribute these vaccines into the people who need them the most, like you folks. Okay? So we just gotta hold tight for a couple more months. That's what I would say. Johanna, do you have anything? Dr. Daly, guys, I just want to let you know, she's a scientist. I'm a clinical person, so I can speak for the patient end of things, but Dr. Daly is actually one of the people in the laboratory who's doing all the science to investigate how antibodies work against viruses and things like that. So, Johanna, do you have anything to add on to what I happen to say?
No. I mean, I agree, Priya, that this vaccine is so efficacious. And Priya and I, unfortunately, have taken care of patients who've been hospitalized. And, a year ago, I understand we had nothing. But this year, we can prevent it. We don't want any of you to be our patients because we still keep your family away from you. We put you through a lot. So Priya and I, we can't help it. We don't want to see any of you in the patients here at Monty. But we're also open to hearing more of your questions. And we respect whatever decision you make.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It has to be right for you. It has to be right for your family. And just because you say maybe not right now, as long as you leave the door open to considering it maybe a couple months from now, we are absolutely glad to hear that too. One thing that I just wanted to add on to what Dr. Daly said was that God forbid that you receive a diagnosis of COVID in the next few weeks or months. Know that vaccines are very, very effective for preventing that. But if you did not happen to get your vaccine and while waiting for the vaccine, you became infected, we also have a series of treatments that we didn't have back in the spring. Lots of people that we know and love unfortunately succumbed to the illness because we didn't really have a great understanding of the disease back then. But because of scientists like Johanna, lots been learned about how to take care of this disease. We do even have treatments, antibody treatments that we can give to patients in our clinic. If God forbid they develop the disease, we have medicines to help prevent them from getting worse. Okay. And so there's lots more available to you now than nobody needs to be alone with this illness. There are ways to help, there are ways to get cared for, and nobody has to suffer alone without getting tested, without getting treated. Okay. Just want to make sure that we share that with you.
We just talked about that. We asked a question when they've already answered it.
All right, so we have a couple more minutes left, about 5 to 10 minutes or so. Does anyone have any questions about, as something that they feel like they would help everyone to hear and talk about.
There's a question in the chat box about the Johnson and Johnson vaccine, also antibody tests recommended to check if the vaccine worked. A couple questions coming in the chat box.
Sure. Johanna, you want to take the J&J question, and I can take the antibody test question?
Right, so I'm just looking it up. It looks like a single dose. People are generating beautiful antibodies. Looks like 90% of participants by a month had very high level antibodies, and they will publish their efficacy data. We just talked about Moderna and Pfizer having about 90% efficacy in older folks, or 87%. That will be published. My guess is it's going to be 90% or greater, because we now have two vaccines that are very efficacious. Johnson and Johnson cannot have less efficacy because none of us would recommend it to our patients. So it hasn't been approved yet. That data should come out, and it's looking awfully good.
Yeah, I would agree. And so when there's even a hint of something so successful, once all of their Johnson and Johnson's application is sent to the Food and Drug Administration, the folks there work basically around the clock for a couple of weeks to release the authorization to put this vaccine out there for public use. Okay, so the future looks good. We will have more vaccines and we will have more doses of the vaccine. I want to also point out that, okay, another poll. How many of you folks receive the flu shot every year, either from a personal choice or because your doctors recommend it? Good, I'm seeing a lot of hands. Guess what the efficacy of the flu shot is at best? Meaning, how good is it at preventing the flu? Not so great, unfortunately. Maybe 50-60% if we're lucky in a good year. But here now we have really advanced technology that's much more advanced than the flu shot, that's offering us at least 75 to 95% protection. I mean, that's definitely Nobel Prize type stuff, folks. This is like modern medicine at its best. And so never in the history of ever have there been vaccines that are this effective. And vaccines truly are the reason that we are all living here and telling this story and able to, reach those advanced ages of 75, 80, 90 plus. Before that, mortality rates were really high. The average life expectancy of people before vaccines was probably in their 40s or 50s. And we have lots and lots of kids dying from bacterial and viral illnesses. So with all due respect to the cancer folks and the cardiology, the heart doctors, without a doubt, vaccines are the #1 breakthrough, scientific breakthrough of our lifetimes. So this is our time to take advantage of this major technology.
So just really quickly for the people that are on the phone, I'm just going to read some responses we got. Tylenol and ibuprofen for the vaccine side effects will not impact the vaccine's power. The current vaccine will protect against variants, but if you need another vaccine, that is fine. Remember, we're all constantly being infected with the run-of-the-mill cold. We make antibodies against them all. The first shot gets you about 50% antibodies against COVID-19. The second pushes you over 90%. So it starts the process of you building up those antibodies, and the second shot will boost you up to the 90%. There is a question, and this is a concern we've had as the vaccine roll has been kind of messy. What's the time frame of getting the second injection? Because we have a couple people who have had difficulty scheduling that second vaccine, depending on where they end up getting scheduled.
Yes, great question. Currently, the CDC says that if you, even a 6-week window is okay. So 6 weeks between your first shot and your second shot, okay? In the UK, they're even pushing that up to like 12 weeks. which is 3 months, which is like 90 days. And that's okay too. This is really comes from a place of the vaccines not being so available. It has to do more with scarcity than like the actual science. But I heard a quote from Anthony Fauci today or yesterday that said, this is going to be okay. To extend it further out, like to 6 or more weeks, it will be okay. A related issue is, what if you get one type of shot for the first dose, but then all they have available is the other type for the second dose, like Pfizer for the first dose, Moderna for the second one. They're also now saying that while that is not ideal, it's still going to be okay because those two work pretty darn similarly. They're essentially twins, the way that they work on the body. Okay, so that would be okay too, if it came to that.
There's a question about recommending the antibody test after the second shot.
Yes, okay. So the antibody test is not recommended. It's not needed, okay? It's not going to help to prove to us that the vaccines work. They did do these in the studies because they had to do that. The FDA was looking at certain data in order to provide their authorization. But in the real world, these antibody tests are not going to be needed. Also, it's too, there's so many different antibody tests out there, we wouldn't know which one is the right one for each different type of vaccine. It might just cause confusion. So the answer is you won't need to confirm after your vaccine. In certain situations, like if you're a healthcare worker, or if you work in a school, or if you attend school, you have to prove that you've had certain shots with titers of like measles, mumps, rubella, and things like that, just to prove that you're immune to things so that you won't spread them. If eventually COVID becomes one of those things to prove that doctors and nurses and school teachers and all these and students can enroll and work and do those things, that may be coming down the road. But for right now, it's not recommended that we follow up the vaccine with an antibody test to prove that it worked. Last thing I'll say about that is that these vaccines are so good, an antibody response is not the only thing that they do. There's like so many different types of cells that participate in our immune system that, and you can't always measure that. So there's like, there's T cells and B cells and all kinds of cells, which are recruited like an army. Imagine that you have your infantry, right? You have the foot soldiers, but then you also have the guys on horses, and you have the guys in the bombers, the choppers up ahead, and you have the Navy, and you have the Marines. That's like our immune system. You have so many different aspects of it that are all, activated by these vaccines. Okay, so it's not just as simple as just the antibodies. There's a lot more going on, which is good. That makes us feel very confident